You've probably heard whispers that your blood type might hold secrets about your future, even how long you'll live. But what if those whispers are only part of a deeper, more unsettling truth? Right now, inside your body, silent factors could be shaping your lifespan without you realizing it. Are you unknowingly at risk or secretly protected? Scientists have been debating this for years, and the answers are far from simple. Before you dismiss it as myth or accept it as fact, there's something critical you need to understand about what your blood type really means for your longevity today. Blood type has long been linked to health, but can it actually predict lifespan? Let's break down what science really says and what it doesn't. When you hear blood type, you probably think of emergency transfusions, medical charts, or something you only need to know before surgery. But what if your blood type is quietly influencing your health in ways you never paid attention to? Not in a dramatic, destiny-determining way, but in subtle biological patterns that may shape your vulnerability to certain diseases over time. Scientists have spent decades studying whether blood type is just a labeling system, or something more deeply connected to how your body reacts to the world. And while it does not determine your fate, research suggests it may tilt the odds in certain directions. Let's break this down. Your blood type is defined by specific markers, antigens, on the surface of your red blood cells. These markers are what make you A, B, AB, or O. Think of them like molecular ID tags that your immune system uses to recognize what belongs to you and what doesn't. Here's where things start getting interesting. Those same markers don't just sit quietly in your bloodstream. They interact with bacteria, viruses, clotting factors, and immune responses in ways that scientists are still trying to fully understand. Over time, patterns began to emerge. For example, some studies have suggested that people with certain blood types may have a higher risk of cardiovascular issues, while others may be slightly more protected. It's not a guarantee, far from it, but rather a statistical trend that shows up in population-level data. And that distinction is important. We're not talking about destiny. We're talking about probability. Your blood type might influence how thick your blood tends to be, how easily it clots, or how your immune system responds to inflammation. These are small differences, but over decades, small differences can add up. Now consider infectious diseases. Historically, researchers have noticed that certain blood types may offer partial resistance or vulnerability to specific infections. This doesn't mean immunity or certainty. It simply means that pathogens may find it slightly easier or harder to bind to cells depending on your blood chemistry. That idea alone has led to decades of research into whether blood type could subtly shape long-term health outcomes. But here's where things get controversial. Some interpretations of this research have been exaggerated in popular media, leading people to believe their blood type predicts their lifespan or major diseases with precision that is not supported by science. In reality, blood type is only one small piece of an extremely complex puzzle. Lifestyle, environment, genetics, stress, diet, sleep, and access to healthcare all play far larger roles in determining how long and how well you live. Still, scientists haven't dismissed blood type entirely. Why? Because it keeps showing up in correlations that are too consistent to ignore. For instance, certain blood types appear slightly more prone to clotting disorders, while others show small differences in inflammation markers. Again, these are trends, not rules, but they raise important questions about how deeply blood chemistry is tied to overall health. And here's something most people don't realize: your blood type is fixed from birth. Unlike weight, fitness, or lifestyle habits, it doesn't change. That makes it an interesting reference point for long-term studies. because it remains constant across your entire life. So researchers ask a simple question: if everything else changes but blood type doesn't, could it be a silent background factor influencing risk patterns over decades? The answer so far is cautious, maybe, but not in isolation. One of the biggest misconceptions is thinking blood type acts like a switch, good or bad, healthy or unhealthy. In reality, it behaves more like a lens that slightly alters how your body interacts with biological stressors. Imagine two people exposed to the same virus, eating the same diet, and living similar lifestyles. Their outcomes might still differ slightly, not because of blood type alone, but because of how multiple biological systems respond differently at a microscopic level. That's the level scientists are examining, and it's why this topic continues to attract attention. Not because blood type is destiny, but because it might be one of many subtle variables that contribute to long-term health patterns we are only beginning to understand. So before jumping to conclusions about lifespan or longevity, it's crucial to understand this foundation. Blood type is not a prediction. It is a biological characteristic that may slightly influence risk, not determine outcome, and that distinction changes everything. Because once you remove the myth of certainty, what remains is something far more interesting and far more complex. A bold claim often circulates online that your blood type can influence how fast you age. It sounds dramatic, almost like something from a medical conspiracy theory. But beneath the noise, there are scientific discussions worth taking seriously if we separate evidence from exaggeration. First, let's be clear about what aging faster actually means in science. It does not refer to wrinkles or appearance alone. Biological aging is about how quickly your cells, blood vessels, and immune system lose efficiency over time. Two people can be the same age chronologically, but very different biologically. And this is where blood type research becomes interesting again. Some studies have observed subtle links between blood type and markers associated with aging, things like inflammation levels, vascular health, and cellular repair efficiency. These aren't dramatic differences, but in long-term population studies, small patterns sometimes emerge. One of the most discussed areas is inflammation. Chronic inflammation is one of the biggest drivers of aging. It silently affects the heart, brain, and organs over decades. Certain blood types have been loosely associated in research with slightly different inflammatory profiles. This doesn't mean one group is doomed or another is protected, but rather that the baseline immune response may not be identical across all blood types. Think of it like different engine settings. Some may run slightly hotter, others slightly cooler under stress, but all engines still function. Now, why does this matter for aging? Because inflammation is not a short-term issue. It builds slowly over time, often without symptoms. Even a small difference in baseline inflammation could, theoretically, contribute to long-term variations in how the body wears down. Another area of interest is cardiovascular aging. The circulatory system is central to longevity. Blood vessels must remain flexible, clean, and efficient for decades. Some blood types have been associated in research with slightly higher risks of clotting or cardiovascular stress markers. Again, these are statistical tendencies, not individual predictions. If blood flows more smoothly and clotting risk is lower, the cardiovascular system may experience less strain over time. Conversely, slightly higher clotting tendencies could, in theory, increase wear on the system. But here's the critical point. Lifestyle factors like diet, exercise, smoking, and stress levels are far more powerful than blood type in shaping cardiovascular health. Still, researchers continue exploring these patterns because even small biological differences can matter when stretched across 70 or 80 years. There is also growing interest in how blood type may interact with cellular repair processes. Your body is constantly repairing DNA damage, replacing old cells, and managing oxidative stress. Some early research suggests that immune system efficiency, partly influenced by blood characteristics, could affect how quickly damage accumulates. But this area is still highly experimental, and no strong conclusions exist. What often gets lost in popular discussions is scale. People tend to interpret findings as blood type A ages faster, or blood type O lives longer, but real scientific data does not support such absolute statements. At most, researchers observe slight shifts in risk distributions across large groups. These shifts are measured in percentages, not destinies. And that difference is crucial. A 5% change in risk at a population level does not mean anything definitive for an individual. It means that across millions of people, a pattern appears weakly in one direction, but individual outcomes still vary wildly. This is where misunderstanding often turns into myth. The idea of fast-aging blood types spreads because it is simple. Human biology is not. Aging is influenced by thousands of variables: genetics, sleep quality, diet, emotional stress, exposure to pollution, physical activity, and even social connection. Blood type, if it plays a role at all, is only a small background factor. However, scientists don't dismiss it entirely for one reason: consistency. Even though the effects are small, certain associations keep appearing across different studies in different countries. That repetition is what keeps the topic alive in research discussions. It suggests there may be underlying biological mechanisms we do not fully understand yet. But here is where a more grounded perspective matters. Even if blood type does influence aging slightly, it is not a control switch. It is more like a faint modifier in a system dominated by far stronger forces. Imagine trying to steer a massive ship using a gentle breeze. It exists, but it does not decide the direction alone. So when people ask whether some blood types age faster, the most accurate scientific answer is not in any meaningful, predictable way. What matters more is how you live inside your biology, not the label your blood carries, because aging is not written in one marker. It is written in decades of choices, environments, and adaptations. And that brings us to a deeper question scientists are still trying to answer. If blood type effects are so small, why do they appear at all? And what does that really mean for the bigger picture of human longevity? Few topics in biology create as much tension between curiosity and skepticism as the idea that blood type could influence lifespan. On one side, there are studies suggesting subtle correlations between blood type and certain health risks. On the other side, there is equally strong scientific evidence showing that these links are weak, inconsistent, or heavily dependent on other factors. So which is it? Does the science support the idea or completely undermine it? The honest answer is uncomfortable for people who want a clear yes or no. It does both, depending on how you interpret it. Let's start with what supports the claim. Over the past several decades, researchers have identified patterns between blood types and specific health conditions. Some studies have found associations between certain blood types and cardiovascular risk factors, such as clotting tendencies and cholesterol-related outcomes. Others have explored links with infectious disease susceptibility, suggesting that pathogens may interact differently with certain blood group antigens. These findings are not random. They show up in multiple population studies across different regions, which is why scientists continue to investigate them. One of the most frequently discussed examples involves cardiovascular health. Some research has observed that individuals with non-O blood types may have slightly higher levels of certain clotting factors in the blood. In theory, This could contribute to a marginal increase in risk for conditions related to blood clots. But again, slightly higher risk does not mean high risk. It means a statistical difference that becomes visible only when studying large populations. Another area of interest is infectious disease interaction. Certain pathogens appear to bind more easily to specific blood group antigens, which may explain why some blood types show different susceptibility patterns in outbreak studies. This has been observed historically and continues to be studied in modern immunology. So yes, there is scientific evidence that blood type is not entirely neutral in biological interactions. But here is where the contradiction begins. When researchers try to connect these small biological differences to something as complex as lifespan, the clarity disappears. The large-scale studies that look at overall longevity consistently show that lifestyle and environmental factors dominate outcomes. Diet, physical activity, smoking status, alcohol consumption, stress levels, socioeconomic conditions, and access to health care all exert far stronger influences than blood type. In fact, when these variables are properly controlled in research, the impact of blood type on lifespan becomes extremely small, often statistically insignificant or too inconsistent to draw firm conclusions. This is why many scientists are cautious. Correlation does not equal causation, and blood type correlations often weaken or disappear when deeper variables are included in analysis. There is also a major methodological issue: confounding factors. Blood type distributions vary slightly between populations and ethnic groups. At the same time, lifestyle and environmental conditions also vary between those groups. This makes it difficult to isolate blood type as an independent factor. What looks like a biological effect may actually be the result of overlapping influences. For example, if a certain population has both a higher prevalence of a specific blood type and a higher incidence of a disease, it does not automatically mean the blood type is responsible. It could be diet, healthcare access, genetics, or a combination of many hidden variables. This is where many popular interpretations go wrong. They simplify a deeply layered system into a single cause. Another challenge is effect size. Even in studies that do find associations, the differences are typically small. In statistical terms, they rarely rise to the level where they can be used to predict individual outcomes. At best, they describe trends across groups, not destinies for individuals. And this is the key scientific contradiction. Blood type shows up in data, but it does not behave like a controlling factor. Some researchers argue that blood type is more of a biological background variable. It may slightly influence how the body responds to stress, infection, or inflammation, but it does not override the dominant drivers of health and aging. Others go further and suggest that blood type effects may be indirect rather than direct. In other words, it is not blood type itself causing differences, but how it interacts with other biological systems under specific conditions. This is why conclusions remain cautious and often frustratingly non-definitive. The science does not fully dismiss the idea, but it also does not support dramatic claims about lifespan prediction. Instead, it sits in a middle ground, acknowledging weak, inconsistent associations while emphasizing the overwhelming influence of non-genetic factors. And this is where the controversy continues in public discussion. Simplified headlines often exaggerate findings, while scientific papers emphasize limitations and uncertainty. The gap between those two interpretations is where most misconceptions grow. So where does that leave us? With a reality that is less dramatic but more accurate. Blood type may contribute to subtle biological differences, but it is not a meaningful predictor of how long you will live. The contradiction is not a failure of science. It is a reflection of complexity. Human longevity is not controlled by one variable. It is the result of countless interacting systems, each adding or subtracting small influences over time. And that leads directly to the most important question of all. If genetics like blood type play such a small role, what actually determines the pace of aging and the length of a human life? If there is one conclusion that modern longevity research keeps circling back to, it's this. Your lifespan is not written in a single biological trait. Not in your blood type, not in one gene, not in a single lab marker. It is the outcome of an ongoing interaction between your biology and your environment, shaped over decades. And when scientists compare lifestyle factors to genetic ones, the imbalance becomes very clear. Genetics, including traits like blood type, set a baseline. They define certain tendencies, how your body might respond to inflammation, how efficiently you process fats, or how your immune system recognizes threats. But baseline is not destiny. It is simply the starting point. What happens after that is largely shaped by what you do every day. Take cardiovascular health, for example. Even if two people have different genetic risk profiles, the one who smokes remains sedentary, eats a highly processed diet, and sleeps poorly will almost always accumulate far more biological damage over time. The other person, even with a less favorable genetic setup, can significantly reduce their risk through consistent healthy behavior. This is one of the most repeated findings in epidemiology. Lifestyle can override genetic risk. Blood type sits very low on the list of meaningful longevity factors, far below exercise, nutrition, stress management, sleep quality, and social connection. In large-scale studies of aging populations, these lifestyle variables consistently show stronger and more direct correlations with lifespan than any blood group classification. One of the strongest predictors of longevity is cardiovascular fitness. The health of your heart and blood vessels influences nearly every organ in your body. Regular physical activity improves circulation, reduces inflammation, enhances metabolic function, and supports brain health. These effects accumulate over time, creating a protective buffer against age-related decline. No blood type can compete with that level of influence. Another major factor is chronic stress. Long-term stress affects hormonal balance, immune response, and cellular repair mechanisms. Elevated cortisol levels over years can accelerate biological aging, contributing to fatigue, cognitive decline, and increased disease risk. Again, this effect is independent of blood type. It applies universally. Sleep is another critical pillar. Poor sleep disrupts hormonal regulation, weakens immune defenses, and impairs cognitive function. Over time, it increases vulnerability to nearly every major age-related condition. Improving sleep quality has measurable effects on longevity markers within months, not decades. Diet also plays a dominant role. Diets high in ultra-processed foods, excess sugar, and unhealthy fats increase inflammation and metabolic strain. Meanwhile, balanced diets rich in whole foods, fiber, and micronutrients support cellular repair and metabolic efficiency. These effects are well documented across populations worldwide. When you compare these variables side by side with blood type, the difference in impact size is enormous. Blood type differences, where they exist, are subtle and statistical. Lifestyle differences are large and observable at the individual level. This is why modern gerontology, the science of aging, focuses far more on modifiable behaviors than fixed traits. Researchers are interested in what can be changed, not just what is inherited. That doesn't mean genetics are irrelevant. Far from it. Genetics can influence susceptibility to certain conditions and affect how strongly your body responds to environmental factors. But they rarely operate in isolation. They interact constantly with your lifestyle choices. Think of genetics as the blueprint of a building, and lifestyle as the maintenance and daily usage of that structure. A strong blueprint poorly maintained will still deteriorate. A less ideal blueprint well maintained can remain functional far longer than expected. This is where misconceptions about blood type and longevity often break down. People assume that a biological label must have a direct, proportional effect on lifespan. But biology rarely works in such simple ratios. Most outcomes are polygenic and multifactorial, meaning they arise from many small influences working together. Even in research areas where blood type shows some association, those effects are dwarfed by broader health behaviors. Scientists often describe blood type as a background variable, something that may slightly adjust risk profiles but does not determine the final outcome. There is also an important psychological dimension. When people believe their lifespan is strongly determined by fixed traits like blood type, it can create a sense of fatalism. That mindset can indirectly influence behavior, sometimes in harmful ways. On the other hand, understanding the true balance of factors can shift focus toward actionable changes. And that is where the real power lies, because unlike blood type, lifestyle is not fixed. It evolves with decisions made daily. Small, consistent actions, walking regularly, eating better, managing stress, improving sleep, compound over time. The effects are not immediate, but they are cumulative and significant. Over decades, those small choices can shape biological age more than almost any inherited trait. So when the question is asked, does your blood type determine your lifespan? The scientific perspective becomes clear. It may contribute a faint background influence in certain contexts, but it does not define the trajectory of your life. The dominant forces are far more practical, visible, and controllable, and that realization shifts the focus away from something you cannot change toward everything you can.